sound check.
Nice,
okay?
thank you.
We're just gonna do a quick sound check and then. I have a cordless mic. If you would rather have a cordless mic, what use?
You know, I think I'm going to stay here because I just wrote this recently, and so I'm going to have to.
But I mean, if you want even the cordless instead of this, but if this is okay.
No, I think this is just
Oh,
fine.
it sounds like it's picking up good.
Yeah.
Good, it's been telling her. Yeah. We'll
You
just
wanna do a check?
Check.
Check.
Can you hear?
Is that good? Okay. I can always use my classroom voice.
That's perfect. Then that's good. Then you're good. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you very much.
Good evening. Welcome to the Fall 2021 Growing Through Loss series. I am Susan Amos Palmer. I'm director of the program and a member at St. John the Baptist Catholic Church in New Brighton. St. John's is one of the coalition members. The whole program is sponsored by the North Suburban Grief Coalition, and we are blessed today to be hosted by Abiding Savior. Lisa, do you want to come and say your thing? And then I'll start.
It's hard to do it with it on. Yeah, you can take it off if you're from right here. I just want to welcome all of you here on behalf of Abiding Savior. I'm Pastor Lisa Engen, and I'm one of the pastors here along with Pastor Ryan Brodeen and our deacon Brad Mills. And so we welcome you. We're very honored to be able to have this Growing Through Loss. We look forward to being able to hosting this group. And really, when I look out, this is one of the biggest groups we've had in a long time in a whole, since this pandemic has, so it's wonderful to be able to look out and to see you. So I know it's really hard to come tonight, and it takes a lot of courage to come through the doors and to take this time for yourself, for healing, for reflection, for sharing. And so I thank you for coming. And I wanted to thank Pastor Dave Rogie for sharing music. And he will be here as often as he is able before our sessions to just have beautiful music. He's amazing. And so thank you, Dave, for sharing. And thank you to Growing Through Loss. Thank you.
For this series, I'm going to do openings out of this book that's called The Wind Blows, the Ice Breaks, Poems of Loss and Renewal by Minnesota Poets, and it's edited by Ted Bowman and Elizabeth Burke Johnson. Ted is one of the people who speaks for this program, and I'm confident that you'll appreciate as I read these. They're very nice, and they're pretty short, so it's not like you have to pay a lot of attention right now. The first one I'm going to read, and then I'll introduce our speaker, is by Mary Willett Hughes. It's called Credo. Thorns should never be plucked from the roses. I am alone, and before me on the theater's white screen in time-lapse photography, a tangerine rose discloses its delicate morning sky, sculpting the horizon, pellet by pellet by mortal pellet, enclosed in the darkness of dying and death. My horizon is empty. But before my eyes, as color and shadow slowly unfold, I encounter the heart of the rose. I begin to open, begin to comprehend, as new tears form, the days of sweetness, the days of thorns. Sister Adele Lassan is a school sister of Notre Dame. She is funeral services coordinator for Catholic Charities. She was a pastoral minister in parishes for 11 years, and before that, she spent 13 years in the classroom in small towns and in the inner city of St. Paul. Adair is a divorce and child custody mediator, as well as a teacher of skilled for support group facilitators. She holds a master's degree in counseling and psychology from St. Mary's University in Minneapolis and was a licensed independent social worker. Tonight, she's going to talk to us about grief and loss. Please welcome Sister Adair.
Thank you. All of us here are wounded. Everyone has a wound. So let's look at what I mean by that. Loss is the wound. Grief is the healing. Oh, yeah, I'm not going to wander too much, but it's a good idea.
Just while you're putting that on, I'm just going to say a brief thing.
Okay.
I also want to say to you tonight that it is being recorded and it will be on, and we're online right now on the GTL, or am I right? Yeah, Going Through Loss, GTL North Suburban YouTube page. And also it is on the Abiding Savior Facebook page. And so if you know of others who would like to hear tonight from wherever they are, we want to welcome all of you. Good, thank you, and I'll help you put it on. Let's see.
Just on my
Which
ear?
Yeah.
I have to have it on. Oh, I see the microphone's there.
Oh, this one, then it's this year. Then this year's better. Sorry. And now
I've
we
got
turn
the
it on.
picture on that, I hope.
Now we have to turn it on. Yep, now it's on.
All right.
Would Jack?
Thank
hear
you.
it good?
Yeah, I'm
Make
sure.
you can hear. If you can't hear, just.
Come up further. As I mentioned before, some of you were in here when I said I use my classroom voice. I have a natural classroom voice, but I was in the classroom for some years, and especially with 7th and 8th graders, you get to have a pretty loud voice sometimes. Those of you that are teachers here know that. So I'm taking a look at loss as the wound. That's what we all have in common here. We are all wounded. And the grief is the healing. And that's what we're all about. We're not done with that yet. Maybe you're done with the loss for now, but there are losses in our life all the time. I noticed that when I was doing counseling with separating divorced folks, and I did that for 30 years, everything that they had going on inside of them was from the loss of the relationship. And it did havoc to their lives. But then I started noticing with other folks that I was counseling that no matter what they were coming in for, the bottom line was that they were going through some kind of loss. So you're in good company with everybody around you here having the same wound, but not all of you will take care of that wound the same way. So let's take a look at what grief is. First of all, it's a natural response to our loss. It's a natural response. It's not something that's odd. It's the emotional suffering that you feel when someone or something that you love is taken away. Often, the pain of loss can feel so overwhelming. You may experience all kinds of difficult emotions, from shock and anger to disbelief and guilt and profound sadness. And we'll talk about some of those things. The pain of grief can also disrupt your physical health, making sleep very difficult for some people, eating, or even thinking straight. It's hard to do all those things and many other things too. These are normal reactions to loss, normal. The more significant the loss, however, the more intense your grief might be. Coping with loss of someone or something you love is one of life's biggest challenges. A lot of you probably are thinking during the time of your loss, I didn't ask for this. How come I feel like this? I never thought it would be like this. You may associate grieving with the loss of a death of a loved one, which is often the case, and it's the most intense type of grief. But any loss can cause grief. One of the things that I remember is when I first was learning the computer some 10 years ago or so, I lost a whole big program I was working on that computer. Guess what I felt? I felt empty. I thought, oh my goodness. And some of the things I talk about in loss and how we feel in our emotions, I felt some of those with a darn paper, a document. It was so surprising to me. So there are other kinds of losses. And they were mentioned in your brochure. Things like divorce and a relationship that breaks up, or the loss of health. I'm 80 now, and I guess that I am learning that loss is something that a different loss is something that I experience almost every day. And so we experience that loss, like losing a job or financial instability. This time of COVID and what's been going on in our economy has been very difficult for people. A lot of loss. People have lost their businesses. The loss in a child, a miscarriage. The loss when you retire. That's a different feeling. The death of a pet. I have been present and part of a ritual for the death and burial of a pet of a friend of mine. So attached to that pet. And it was one of those things where I looked at that and I thought, wow, I guess you can be very, very upset about the death of a thing. I shouldn't say things because most people don't call their pets things, do they? They're human as far as they're concerned. Or maybe you had a dream that now is lost because of something or other, a loss of a job, maybe sometimes means the loss of a dream. A loved one's illness, you can feel some loss in that. A loss of a friendship. A loss of safety, maybe, after you've had some traumatic experience. Don't feel safe anymore. Sometimes selling the family home. That some people find that loss very, very difficult. So there are even subtle losses in life that can trigger a sense of grief. For example, you might grieve after moving away from home, graduating from college, changing jobs, or moving out of a neighborhood. Whatever your loss, it is personal to you. So don't feel ashamed about how you feel or believe that it's somehow only appropriate to grieve for certain things. No, that's your loss and you get to have it. Get to have it. If the person or the animal or the relationship or the situation was significant to you, it's normal to grieve the loss that you're experiencing. Whatever the cause of your grief, though there are healthy ways to cope with the pain that in time can ease your sadness and help you to come to terms with your loss. You can find new meaning and eventually move on with your life. And at some point in your journey of loss and your journey of grieving, you don't feel like any of that is ever going to come. And there are different processes, and it's your process. Whatever your process is the one that's important for you. It's a highly individual experience. You can't copy what one of your siblings does. There are 6 people in my family. I have 4 brothers and a sister. And when my mother died about 20 years ago, we all grieved in a different way. Each one of us. There was no two alike. And it was okay, each one. Or we could look kind of askance at one of them and say, "What? You're doing that? Mom just died." We did not do that, but a lot of people will judge others because of how they're handling their grief. But remember, your grief is an individual thing, it's yours. And all grief takes time. But your time, again, healing happens gradually, usually. It can't be forced. It can't be hurried. And there's no normal time for grieving. Some people start to feel better after a few weeks or some months, and others take years. And that can be measured in years for a lot of people. Whatever your grief experience, it's important to be patient with yourself and allow the process to unfold naturally. Do not push it. Do not make it be something that is not you. There are a few myths that come with grieving, and you probably have heard these before, some of them. The pain will go faster if you ignore it. Just ignore it. Get over it. Just ignore it. And that cannot be further from the truth. The fact is, trying to ignore your pain or keep it from surfacing will only make it worse in the long run, because sometime you have to deal with it. For real healing, it is necessary to face your grief and actively deal with it. You can't go around it. You have to go through it. Any of you that belong to the 12-step programs know that's one of their sayings. You can't go around it. You have to go through it. Another myth: it's important to be strong in the face of loss. Stiff upper lip. Don't let anybody see that you've got some things going on with you. After all, I have to go on with my life. And feeling sad or frightened or lonely, a normal reaction to loss. Crying doesn't mean that you're weak. Even if you're not a, quotes, crier, that doesn't mean that you're weak. You don't need to protect your family or friends by putting on a brave front. Showing your true feelings can help them and you. Here's another myth. If you don't cry, it means you aren't sorry about the loss. So we go the other way around. How come she's not crying? Or how come he's not crying? His spouse was so close to him. And crying is a normal response to sadness, but it's not the only one. Those who don't cry may feel the pain just as deeply as others. They may simply have other ways of showing it. And you can bet that the person that, quotes, doesn't cry will probably just start pouring out tears at some time when they least expect it, and probably when nobody else is around. And this is the myth that floats around all the time. Grieving should last about a year. There's no specific time for grieving. That's the fact. No specific time. How long it takes differs from person to person. As I mentioned before, you are in charge of your grief, and that means the timing is yours also. And then here's one more myth. Moving on with your life means forgetting about your loss. Not correct. Moving on means you've accepted your loss, but it's not the same thing as forgetting Who wants to forget? Nobody wants to forget. You can move on with your life and keep the memory of that someone or something you lost as an important part of you. I mentioned my mother died some years back now. And in fact, she was my age when she died. And I pass by a mirror and I think I see her. Sometimes I look like her. And every once in a while, I think I laugh like her. So she's there. I don't forget her at all because I'm reminding myself of my mother. Or anytime I'm talking with my siblings, we always talk about her. So it's one of those things where don't do that. Don't put things aside. Remember, don't forget. As we move through life, these memories can become more and more a part of defining the person that you are. And it's an honor you're honoring your loved one by remembering them, by speaking about them, even the hard parts about the relationship. You know, sometimes you can say, oh my gosh, I used to get so mad when Dad would do this or whatever. So those are things that still bring that loved one to your heart. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a good Lutheran theologian, talked about, and I'm going to kind of paraphrase this. I was going to bring it with me. I forgot. He was in prison during World War II because he was considered to be one of the people who was planning to kill Hitler. And so he had been in prison for a long time. And he says about this kind of thing with loss and death, he said, do not say you are going to fill that hole in your heart with someone or something else, like with a lot of work or something like that. He said, that hole belongs to that person that you are mourning, the one that you are grieving. That belongs to them, and that's the place in you that you can go to in order to be with that person. So dealing with grieving is a difficult thing. There are ways to help us cope with the pain of loss, to come to terms with your grief, and eventually find a way to pick up the pieces and move on with your life. One of the things is acknowledging your pain. How are you? Ouch. You know, I'm not feeling so good today. Or, you know, I feel a little lighter today. But acknowledging the pain is very important. Accepting that the grief may trigger many different and unexpected emotions. This is a fact that I have witnessed myself. When a death comes, let's say it's the death of a parent. When that death comes, maybe 5-10 years after the other parent, the first parent that died, sometimes all of the grief that you thought you had kind of dealt with when that one person died comes pouring in when your other parent dies. And you need to expect the fact that these losses in our lives, they are really connected. It brings up a lot of other things. So you have to acknowledge the fact that sometimes there are different things that trigger emotions that come up from other times. But as I've said many times since I've started, understand that your grieving process is unique to you. It's yours. And seek support from people who care about you. Many times that's family, and many times it is not. Sometimes that's the hardest place to deal with your grief. But find the people you know you can be safe with, the people that you know you can be with. They'll hear you out. They won't make you talk if you don't want to talk. They'll let you talk when you just want to go and go and go and talk and talk and talk. Those are the ones that will support you during your time of grieving. And you need to take care of yourself emotionally by taking care of yourself physically. And we know what that means. Sometimes we change our behaviors after a death of a loved one, or after a divorce, or after some other loss. Sometimes we change our schedules or behaviors that we had before. And those behaviors and those schedules used to work for us. So it's important to try to get back to a schedule that you had before, the things that you did before to do now. And another important thing to remember is to know the difference, try to understand the difference between grief and depression. I want to talk about grief a little bit more, and then we'll get to some issues of depression. Some of you probably have heard about, it's been in the pipeline for a very long time, the 5 stages of grief that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, a psychiatrist, I think she was from Switzerland, had put out there. It was for people who were dying, people who were in hospice. And she said, these are the 5 things that people usually go through when they're dying. And what's happened is that people thought that was such a good idea that they've applied to almost everything about their loss. Now, sometimes that works. But she looked at what everybody was doing and saw that they were generalizing, to the general public, all these good things that she thought people went through when they were dying. What she said was denial. Well, we certainly know that when we lose someone through death, not when the dying person loses their life, but we're talking about now denial that we have. We say, this can't be happening to me. Or just think of maybe what the first words you said after someone said, so-and-so died. Your first words were, oh no. Now, isn't that denial? Oh no, because I don't want to hear that. I don't want that experience to be part of my life. Kubler-Ross also says that anger is another stage of grief. Why is this happening to me? Who can I blame? Anger. Bargaining fits more with the person who's dying than maybe the others. I haven't experienced this much myself, but I hear that other people start some bargaining. Make this not happen, and then I will do such and such a thing. Depression. She calls it depression. I'm too sad to do anything. I'm just going to sit here and vegetate. And acceptance. I'm at peace with what happened. I don't like it. It's hard, but I'm at peace with it. Now, those are the 5 stages that she talked about. And if you're experiencing any of these emotions following a loss, it may help you to know that those are natural and that you'll heal in time. Not everyone who grieves goes through these stages, and that's okay. You do not have to go through each stage in order to heal. Some people resolve their grief without going through any of these stages. And Kubler-Ross said herself, I think this is interesting. She said, I never intended for these stages to be a rigid framework that applies to everyone who mourns. And in her last book before her death in 2004, she said of the 5 stages, they were never meant to be to help tuck messy emotions into neat packages. They are responses to loss that many people have, but there is not a typical response to loss, as there is no typical loss. Our grieving is as individual as our lives, she says. Unique. The Hospice Foundation of America says this about grief. Grief can be a roller coaster. Instead of a series of stages, we might also think of grieving process as a roller coaster, full of ups and downs, highs and lows. Like many roller coasters, the ride tends to be rougher in the beginning. The lows may be deeper and longer. The difficult period should come less intense and shorter as time goes by, but it takes time to work through the loss. Even years after a loss, especially at special events such as a family wedding or birth of a child, we may still experience a strong sense of grief. That from the Hospice Foundation of America. These are all warnings, aren't they, in a lot of ways? It's like, heads up, there's something here that you might want to take in and say, now I know that. There's different symptoms of grief that maybe if we, another heads up, maybe if we knew what those were, we'd say, oh yeah, it's just that. It's just my grieving. So many of us experience the same kind of symptoms, but remember, it's uniquely yours. Almost anything that you experience in the early stages of grief is normal, especially in the early stages, including feeling like you're going crazy. You're feeling like you're in a bad dream or questioning your religious or spiritual beliefs. Where's God? I guess you're going to talk about that, aren't you? That will be good. So some of the emotional symptoms of grief, and you maybe, if I asked you to hold up your hands for these, I bet you have your hand up for a lot of these. Shock and disbelief. Now that certainly is a symptom of grief. It's hard to accept what happened. You may feel numb, have trouble believing that the loss really happened, or even deny the truth of it. If someone you love has died, you may keep expecting them to show up, even though you know they're gone. Shock and disbelief. Sadness, profound sadness, is probably the most universally experienced symptom of grief. You may have feelings of emptiness, despair, yearning, deep loneliness. You may also cry a lot or feel emotionally unstable. Those are all part of the sadness. It's hard to smile. It's hard to even talk to people sometimes when you're so sad. Some people experience the symptom of guilt. You may regret or feel guilty about the things you did or didn't say, or the things you didn't do. You may feel guilty about certain feelings. For example, feeling relieved when the person died after a long, difficult illness. After a death, you may even feel guilty for not doing something to prevent the death, even if there was nothing more you could have done. We all think we got a little bit of Superman or Wonder Woman in us. If I only had done this or that, it would be different now. He'd still be here, or she'd still be here. Another symptom of grieving is anger, as we mentioned, as Kubler-Ross mentioned. Even if the loss was nobody's fault, you may feel angry and resentful. You may feel the need to blame someone. And then another one, fear. It can trigger some of the worries and the fears. You feel anxious or helpless or insecure. And some people even begin to have panic attacks. And I think that fear comes from facing life without that person, or darn, now I have to learn how to do the bills, you know, and I don't know how to do that. And that brings a lot of fear to people. So we talked about emotional symptoms, but the physical ones, these are ones that sometimes people just don't realize. They sneak in on you. Fatigue. I'm so tired. And this is a time when our immunity gets lowered. That's why it's good to keep those masks on. Weight loss or weight gain, that's a physical thing that may happen. And we get aches and pains we didn't know we had before. How come I'm feeling this? How come I'm feeling that? And of course, insomnia. A lot of people, or it could be the other two, where some people sleep too much. So those are all symptoms. One of the things that's important to remember is to seek support for your grief and your loss. I'm glad you're here tonight. I'm glad maybe you'll come every night that these are being offered. Because of the fact that even if you don't know the persons that you're with in a group, there's something about hearing other people talk about their issues makes you feel like you belong to some kind of group and that you're not alone. Yes, your grief is different than the other person's grief, but you do have a group. So that's an important thing. Sometimes family members are not the persons to talk to, as I mentioned before. One of the things that I notice that people say really dumb things sometimes. You know, oh, you'll get over it, don't worry. Or if you've just had a miscarriage, don't worry, you're going to get pregnant again. I mean, really. Those are not really very good statements to say to somebody after the death of somebody that they love. And people do not know how to comfort one another. Sometimes, I mean, think of yourself the first time that you were in line in a funeral home to see the person's family, and you turn around and you say to the person you're with, I don't know what I'm going to say. I feel awful. And you know what? You could say that. You can say, I feel awful. And I'm sure you do too. So it's the thing that people say that really don't help, that bothers us. And the thing that I think that's important is that if a friend or a loved one reaches out to you, it's because they care. Take their care. You give them the gift of them caring for you. Remember, you give them a gift if you allow them to care for you. We can all draw comfort from our faith, but sometimes we think, I don't want to go to church. I cry and cry and cry when I go to church. And I'm beginning to wonder if God really is in all of this. You know, our faith we get a little doubtful about things in our religions. But our faiths usually have some ritual or something about our experience that can be comforting and helpful. And sometimes it can't be very spiritual to us, but you just hang on. That may come. And the person that you can be angry to is God. God will take care of all of your anger. So if you're shaking your fist at God, I'm letting you know that God will be there for you, no matter what. No matter what. And as you grieve, take care of yourself. Face your feelings. Next week's talk that I'm giving is going to be about the feelings issues. I'm going to even give you some how-tos. You should never do that, but that's what I'm going to try to do. If we try to avoid our feelings and sadness, it only prolongs our grief. And unresolved grief can also lead to complications such as depression, anxiety, substance abuse, and other health problems. And as I mentioned before, sometimes keeping up that schedule or whatever it was you did before the death of your loved one, you should just go ahead and try and get that schedule back up again. Expressing your feelings in a tangible way might be helpful. Writing in a journal might be helpful. I remember my mother did that after my stepfather died. And I read that just not too long ago, and I was so surprised at what she was saying. Surprised, I guess, maybe because I didn't know that she wrote it. But it was comforting to see that she took some kind of a measure to kind of keep in touch with her feelings. Keep your hobbies and your interests. That's important. Don't let anybody tell you how to feel. Oh, you shouldn't feel that way by now. Get over it. Get moving on. Don't let anybody do that to you. Those are the people you say, get back, Satan. I don't want you here. You could even ask them, I wish you wouldn't say that because that's not helpful for me. And it's all right with anybody that you love and who really cares for you. Yeah, sometimes they're the ones that say the dumb things. You can just tell them, that's not helpful for me to hear. I wish you wouldn't say that. And remember those triggers I mentioned before, things that can trigger off your grieving. Plan for them. Anniversaries, birthdays, family gatherings, that type of thing. Because what happens, you get an emotional wallop. All of a sudden, it hits you. I didn't know that was going to happen. I was with my family on Easter, and what happened? I felt so sad all day. Be prepared. You might feel sad, but let yourself know that those kinds of things might happen. So, when grief doesn't go away, that's the thing you want to watch for. So, at times, time passes following a significant loss, such as the death of a loved one. It's normal to feel sadness, numbness, anger, and gradually easing up on some of those feelings. These are other difficult emotions because less intense as you begin to accept the loss and start to move forward with your life. And that's nice. There's something called complicated grief, and I understand that a therapist is going to be talking about that in one of your future evenings. So let me just say that complicated grief means that the sadness of losing someone you love never goes away completely, but it shouldn't remain center stage. If that's what your life is the death of that person, weeks and months and years after somebody dies, that's called complicated grief. You need to find some way of dealing with that. And many times the complicated grief is like you're stuck in an intense state of mourning. It's like mourning, 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 grieving, grieving. And it's just good to know that some of those symptoms of complicated death, which you'll probably be hearing about, can be a little strange, like denying that the person even died. Some people go through that. Or imagining that your loved one is in that park where they always are. I'm going to go to the park today and see if maybe he's there. Sometimes it gets beyond the real. That's important to think about dealing with that. And the way to deal with that is to get some therapeutic help. And you can see a therapist even if you don't have complicated grief. Sometimes I don't have somebody to kind of work this out, and I do need someone to work it out with me. So then go ahead and see a therapist. That's one of the best things you can do. That person becomes someone who can talk to you in a way that's not like anybody else, not like your friends or your family, but somebody who can help you take a look at what's going on with you. So the difference between grief and depression, I wanted to let you in on that, and then we'll kind of end up here. It's not always easy to see what the difference is between them. Remember we said that grief can be like a roller coaster, up and down. Today's good, yesterday was awful, next day's awful, and that's good. And so it can be a pretty bad ride. And it involves a lot of emotions, good days, bad days. Even when you're in the middle of your grieving process, you'll have moments of pleasure and happiness. It's okay. You can be happy. You can tell jokes. You can laugh at stuff. You can laugh until you cry. You know how some of your friends got together when you're teenagers and you said, we laughed until we wet our pants because we laughed so hard. And that's okay to get to have one of those days once in a while. It doesn't mean that you're not thinking about your loved one or that you don't have some sadness deep down. So with depression, it's a little different. With depression, there's usually an intense, pervasive sense of maybe guilt. Some people have thoughts of suicide, feelings of hopelessness and worthlessness. Body movements and speech sometimes get slow. Sometimes there's dysfunction of work, school. I can't function anywhere. And seeing or hearing things that aren't there, that's when things get bad. So working through your grief is something that you don't have to have a program for. Take it the natural way. Know the symptoms of different things that might happen. Say to somebody that you care about, I'm kind of wondering about this. What do you think? Or call a therapist and say, I'd like about 2 or 3 counseling sessions just to kind of go through a few things. That would be good. Now, so we say your grief is unique. There is a grieving process, but it's yours, whatever that is. And whatever is your way of grieving, it's normal. The timeline is yours. Nobody can tell you how to do your time. It's yours alone. Take care of yourself while you grieve. And if you have complicated grief, get help. Now we're going to take a few minutes for anybody that might have a reflection themselves about something that you realized as you were sitting here, or if you've got a question. Take it to your group. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Adair. Next week, our program is Emotions and Self-Care While Grieving, and Sister Adair will be back. So we'll have some continuity with having her come back. I am going to take a minute then and introduce the groups and the facilitators. Also, just a reminder that we are live streaming this, and my understanding is that it is going to be on YouTube. Is that correct? And what do they search for to find it? Okay, GTL North Suburban. So, okay. Okay, so also Abiding Savior's Facebook page and YouTube. So you can go back and listen again if you'd like. If you have family members who couldn't come, they could take a look at it too. So please refer people, all right? We will have 9 groups tonight. The way we're going to be doing this is because of COVID and having to have social distance, we are not having refreshments. We are just I'll announce the groups. You can go to your groups. The groups should adjourn by 9 p.m. Facilitators at the end will go to the coffee house. And I also should say we always take donations, and we will have a box back by the table. We bring that every time. So we do that because then we don't have to charge an admission. We just let people make donations, and it's worked out really well. Things balance out. All right, we're going to have 4 loss of spouse groups. And if you miss it when I announce it, I'll stay here and you can come back and I'll help get you directed. 2 of the loss of spouse groups are going to be in the back fellowship hall, which is out the sanctuary, turn left, walk straight back, and then to the right. That's where fellowship hall is. Dwayne Nelson, your group will be there, and Phyllis Anderson, your group will be there in the fellowship hall. The next 2 loss of spouse groups, John Dahl, you will be in, it doesn't have a name, but it's across from the restrooms. It's in the center section. And you're also going to go out the main hall here, turn left, and then turn right. We will also have a couple people out there to help direct, so you can't figure out the room, we'll help you. The next loss of spouse is Jill Peterson. Jill, where are you? Okay, you will be in the room across from the boiler room. Now that room, you're going to turn right and then turn left down the hallway over here, okay? Loss of child group, Nancy Matheson and Sally Pinkston in the choir room. The choir room is also out the sanctuary, turn right and turn left, and just all the way to the end of the hall. Loss of parent, Tom Schlor, in the coffee house, which is out the sanctuary, turn left, turn right, and it's the second room after the first room after the church offices. Loss of grandparent, Jack Anderson and Charlotte Drone, and that's in the youth room. And the youth room is out the door here, turn right and turn left, and it's the first room on the left.